Hi, we're Oxygen Conservation, and this is the Shoot Room Sessions. Kevin, welcome to the Shoot Room.
Thank you very much. Good to see you, Rich.
Can you tell people who you are and what you do?
So I'm Kevin Cox. Sort of a difficult question now. What do I do? I have just stepped down as chair of the RSPB, which I was chair for 7 years, and I was a trustee for 5-6 years before that. So I started in 2011. I'm in that sort of quite nice period at the moment where I've got lots of things going on about. So I'm sure we'll talk about some of those. But yeah, bits and pieces. I also have land in Devon. So I live in Devon, just on the south side of Dartmoor. So I'm sure we'll talk about that. And that takes some management as well, as you know. Owning land, it's not easy. It's not cheap. But yeah, so I'm having a bit of fun at the moment, just looking at different things, different options.
Perfect place to be.
Yeah.
So, career contents page, Kevin. So take us back to as early as you want to start. Like, where did you grow up? And give us those big chapters of the book that would be you.
So I grew up in West London. So I would say under the flight path to Heathrow, which is why my education, I only got 3/4 of an education, because every 15 seconds, every minute, a plane would fly over and I couldn't hear anything that was going on. So it was really just under the flight path. But it was an interesting place because it was West London at the time. There was still that sense that we were close to the countryside, and yet a lot of it was being eaten up even then. I think the thing that really, if I had to pick one thing from my childhood that really determined my interest in nature and everything like that, it's probably fishing. I used to go coarse fishing with my father. We go to gravel pits. We used to go to Kennet and Avon Canal in Wiltshire, fished on the Thames. And I just think sitting by a riverbank is quite meditative. And I find the same if I'm sitting in a bird hide now. Exactly the same thing. I don't fish anymore. But I just found sitting there for hours on end, watching a float and watching kingfishers go past, water voles. There were water voles at the time. Obviously, one of the things that we've almost lost. And just the anticipation that something might turn up. I just found it, quite a magical experience, and I was really gripped by it. I mean, it didn't last, clearly, because I moved into other things, but just, I think it stayed with me, that sense of quietness, being immersed in nature. And I just loved that. And I think that more than anything sort of gave me that sense that, the natural world was really important.
I think you have to be really purposeful of parents these days, because of all the amazing guests we've had in the shoot room, everyone can point to an equivalent thing in their childhood, and it's more often than not, it's a family member that connected them with nature through bird watching or fishing or something of that ilk, or it was a teacher. It was an early teacher that made that connection. And so my kids are 8 and 6 at the minute. I'm trying to be really purposeful about what are the experiences you give them, because there's one of them's going to stick. One of them is going to stick to a passion or an interest that might propel into a career and a lifetime of doing things. So you're not going to find that on, well, I suppose some people find it on the other side of a computer screen and an iPad, but lots don't.
I think one thing that you do get on the other side of a computer screen now that I didn't have is a network, a virtual network that just wasn't available. So, all my friends at school, because we lived close to Heathrow, were into plane spotting. So that's what I did, stand there under the flight path of one of the runways at Heathrow, writing down the numbers. Had I had a network of people who were into bird watching, I'd have been a bird watcher from the age, but nobody was. It just wasn't something. Whereas now, those virtual networks mean that even if you're the only person in your close network, you're real network. There's a virtual network of people
can find it.
And I think there's lots that's toxic about social media. We know that, but there are some really positive things. And I see, for example, RSPB's Youth Council, and these are people, young people from all around the country, and they know each other, not just because they meet, but because they meet virtually. And that, I think, is a fantastic support network that didn't exist when I was there.
Completely agree. The wonderful thing about that incredible talent rushing to this space is they're all about collaboration as well. It's not competition amongst those people anymore. It is how can we work together to help each other and elevate each other to collectively do better. And that certainly wasn't the culture and ethos I grew up in the 80s in the North. It was push the next person down and push yourself forward. And it's so nice that that's changed now, certainly in the sector.
Yeah. Didn't quite grow up in that sort of, I mean, there was competition.
Yeah, the North's grim.
Yeah, you're right.
So to take us from school to the next chapter, when you left school, did you know what you wanted to do next? What was that journey like for you?
No, I went to university. I knew I wanted to go to university. I did English at university. I mean, books were the other thing that really gripped me. And I'm not particularly great at science or maths. If I even thought about ecology, I'm not sure it existed at the time. Too much statistics. I've been hopeless at it. I was not great at most science or maths. And that's partly because I quite like ambiguity. I don't necessarily want the right answer. I want to look, and that's why I read a lot now. I read a lot of poetry particularly. And I think one of the entries for me, again, into the natural world was writing, was poetry particularly. I mean, people like John Clare. That real detailed observation of the natural world and taking you back to a time when there was a lot around, when there was still abundance around. It wasn't perfect. Or Gilbert White and the way that he observed things, and words for me took me as another door into the natural world as well. And so I loved, I still love reading. I loved it. It didn't kill my love of reading. Going to university to do English and some German, because I'd lived between school and university, I lived in Berlin for a while before the wall came down. It's a fascinating experience. Travelled a bit in Eastern Europe, went to East Berlin, went to Prague during that time, during the 70s. It was a really fascinating experience, and then went to university. And then, I didn't have much clue what I was going to do when I came out.
So what was the first job and how did it come about?
I came out and I didn't know what I was going to do, and I did some temporary work, and then a friend of mine from university phoned me up and said, "It's about time you got a proper job, isn't it?" And she was working for a publishing company, and she said, "Well, we've got a job going."
Power networks again?
Exactly, I'm afraid so. Yeah, and that again isn't something that happens as much now, and I think that's probably a good thing. I mean, that sort of nepotism. Yeah. Anyway, she phoned me up and she said, "As long as you're reasonably on time and you're sober, you'll get the job."
Was the sober bit rare in the publishing industry?
Well, it was actually. It was at that time when I started. Yeah, I mean, my editor would go down the pub every lunchtime with the publisher, and two of them would sink
Liquid lunch,
3-4 pints. Yeah, and she would come back and she would. Anyway, we don't want to go there. So yes, there was a lot of that at the time, and that culture has gone, and I don't think that's a bad thing. And I
with the culture bit, I think it's so. There's a spectrum of things. Some behaviours historically are absolutely egregious, and of course have no place at any time. But I think it's always dangerous to consider cultures of the time versus now. Things change so much in terms of awareness of things and behaviors and things like that. So I always remember series like Life on Mars and things that were set in the 70s or the 80s. So very different times.
Yeah, I think we forget how different it is. Because you have a trajectory of a life, and it feels really seamless. And then you look back and you think, how on earth was that acceptable at the time?
Yeah, completely.
But
so my 8-year-old at the moment, the new turn of phrase in the school playground, if you want to say something's terrible, is So we were on holiday and I was drinking coffee and I playfully said, "Would you like some coffee, Emma?" And she said, "No, I'd rather live in the 1990s. That's the insult. The insult is it's so dark ages. And I was like, it wasn't that terrible ever. It was all right.
It
was
wasn't
all right.
terrible.
Yeah.
So this is going to sound really nerdy, but I used to spend my lunchtimes going around the British Museum because we were very close. It was in central London, and I just loved that. So
Being
I
nerdy
didn't
is
have the
cool
money
now.
to go and drink 4 pints at lunchtime, so I did things that were free, and that's one of the reasons again why I believe things like museums, having them free, it makes such a difference. I wouldn't, if I'd had to pay even a small entry fee, wouldn't have been going. So I think that. But I had that, I went through that. I went into specialist magazines and I loved it because I'm not an expert on anything, but I love people who are. And working on specialist magazines brings you, very close.
Help people understand that term of art. What would be regarded as a specialist magazine?
Oh, hobbyist magazines, which is pretty much what I worked on, lots of things. So computer magazines, at the beginning, I was right there at the beginning of the sort of computer games and computer boom. I launched magazines like Computer Shopper, which was a telephone directory of a magazine back in the 80s. Moved on from that. I produced magazines I moved to Bath to a publishing company there and was publishing craft magazines, classical music, whole raft of different magazines, cycling. I just loved coming up and talking to people who were, passionate, deeply passionate about one particular area, and just loved it. And I still do. I love tapping into people's
Range of subjects.
and the range of subjects, because it meant that I could be, in the morning talking to people about needlework, and then in the afternoon, talk to people about sprockets on their bike, and so I have a very shallow knowledge of quite a lot of things.
Range.
And then the company I was working for was sold. This is in the mid-90s, and I had to stay for a while. And my wife and I, I didn't want to stay, and there were good reasons. I was managing director, and decided I didn't want to work for a larger company. And she and I, it was not a large publishing company. It was a conglomerate. It was Pearson. I mean, there was nothing wrong with the company. I mean, this was back in the 90s, but it was quite stuffy. I mean, they owned theme parks. They owned one of the great vineyards. I can't remember whether it was Latour or Lafite in France. Whole range of things. And as a publishing company, we were bought, and I don't think they had much understanding of what we were doing. We were just numbers. So I didn't find it particularly satisfying. I was a bit bored, needed to find something else.
I think that the fit's so important. So for some people, a big company environment, the structures, the processor, a slow-moving tanker of a company is reassuring and is safe, and they feel comfortable there. For me, I'd have hated it as well. So my time spent in the public sector, the last team I managed was 450-ish people. I couldn't be authentically me. You were a mouthpiece of a set of rules and procedures. You weren't necessarily able to do the things that you thought were morally right and appropriate. And it just didn't fit. I didn't feel like that was the environment where I could be my best. And for a while you think, well, I can change this. No, it's the system and the process. So being able to start my own business with Oxygen House and grow it from the start, you can at least invest your time, effort and energy into the thing that authentically you believe in that way. So I think when people are thinking about their careers now, being very purposeful about the environment that allows you to have the life and career you want is so important.
I agree. I'd gone from something that was entrepreneurial. I joined this company in Bath, and there were 50 people, and I left when there were 500. So we grew in 7 years, not 700 years. I'm not that old. 7 years, we grew in so rapidly, and it was just this fantastic adventure. And then all of a sudden, it became just numbers on a spreadsheet. And I thought, this just isn't for me.
I get asked, do we want OC to be a massive? I'm like, no. So we're 30-ish now. We'll probably be 40 by the end of next year. Nominally in my head, I don't want to go above 50 because I think that's the level previously where I felt as if you could generally know everybody, help everybody, use that sense of team and collaborative nature there. Whereas it just, I mean, the number's arbitrary, right? It could be 45, it could be 55, but it's not 200. Definitely not. So I want to keep us as lean as
I
possible.
don't know. I mean, I think there are other ways. Magazines are great because actually you've got smaller units within a larger company's interest. So each one of those was a self-contained unit. So if you've got a bicycling magazine, it has nothing really connecting it to a classical music magazine in terms of subject matter, but in terms of the publishing, all very similar. So you've still got, they can share information and ways of doing things, but they are different units. And that meant that actually it never felt, even in large companies, and I never worked for a massive publisher, but even with 500 people, it was the unit of the magazine or the group of magazines, not necessarily the entire company, even though I was running that.
How did the transition for you from working within the company to becoming the managing director? What was that process like? Was that a conscious choice early on that you were, I want to lead, I want to be at the front of this, or iterative? What did that look like for you?
Well, I joined, and it was a small company, and the guy who had set it up was a guy called Chris Anderson, who now runs TED. And there was another, I joined as a publishing director. Another guy, a good friend of mine, was also publishing director, came in at the same time. Actually, a certain amount of competitiveness, we talked about that, was quite a good thing because we both grew our parts and we became joint managing directors of our parts of that company and continued to be a little trio growing this company rapidly. And that was quite an adventure. It was great fun. I mean, it was hard work. We did not stop for that period of time. But I knew when it was the right time. I don't want to be bored. I don't want to just go through the motions. I was contracted to stay for a period of time after the sale and then left and had no regrets about leaving. But I had garden leave for a year. So my wife and I, we sold up and we went traveling for a year. So we spent 6 months in South America. So we were, I was 40 at the time, so we were pretty old backpackers, but that's
And I think let's take that in context. So that's more common and more heard of now, but people weren't doing that when you did that. Sort of mid-career taking that sort of leap.
No, I mean, it's partly because we didn't have children, so we could do that, and we didn't have those sorts of responsibilities, and we had money, because I was a director and a shareholder, so we had some money to put into that, and money when we came back. So we weren't. So if either of us got ill, we could at least go into a decent hotel and not have to sit on a concrete floor somewhere. But it was great because we also, we were backpackers. So we stayed with people. We did, a lot of really good things. But revived my interest in bird watching. I was, sort of doing bits, but everything was concentrating on work. And now I had the time to just immerse myself in a different, really. I've been to Peru before. I've been to Costa Rica before, but never spent that amount of time, 6 months going up the Andes. And it was just a magical experience. It was fantastic. And we were diving, we went trekking, we did some long treks. We climbed in Bolivia, we climbed Huayna Potosí, 6,000 meter mountain. So we did some fairly, adventurous things. Had a great time. And then went up through the national parks in America. We cycled on a small-wheeled tandem that we bought that folds up into 2 suitcases. So you take the suitcases on the plane, you then unpack it, turns into a small-wheeled tandem, which the 2 of us cycled round South Island, New Zealand, towing all our luggage in the suitcases behind you. Just madness. And then Vietnam, we spent 6 weeks in Nepal. We spent literally a year to the day traveling. And that was just an amazing experience. In a way, I saw it as 28 back-to-back 2-week holidays. It was because I hadn't had much of a holiday while we were working and so on. And then I the whole time we were away, I kept thinking, I really don't want to go back into publishing. I'm done with that. Let's do something else. And within 3 weeks of coming back, we were launching a publishing company.
So before we do that, that's magical, Kevin. That
Yeah.
whole story. If the Kevin and Donna that arrived back spoke to the couple that left, how were they different? What had changed about you over that 12-month period?
I think that's a very interesting question. Yeah. Does travel change you? I think it does. I mean, it slowed us down. I still remember, driving, coming back, getting in a car, driving, because I hadn't driven pretty much for a whole year, except in the States, and getting beeped the whole time for driving so slowly everywhere. Because we were just, both relaxed about things, but also seeing a lot of things that didn't like. I can still remember sitting, in a place looking over a road in Bolivia and seeing lorry after lorry with massive trees coming down. You could see the deforestation. You could see, diving in Colombia. You could see the bleaching of the coral reefs. Saw it on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia where we dived. Saw some shocking things and saw the degradation that was happening. So I think it certainly made the two of us much more aware, not just reading about it, but coming back, seeing it. But also the other side of it, just seeing wonders, just seeing some amazing places, wildlife, people. We met some great people while we were traveling, both people who lived in places, the kindness, the support, all of that, and some great travelers as well from around the world. I mean, all of that, I think, just gives you a completely different perspective on things. And I worry now, I go, when I give talks or go to conferences, and there's a lot of people in their early 20s, mid-20s now, the question keeps coming up about air travel particularly, and travel around the world. And and how can you justify it? How can you justify getting on a plane? And I think it's a really good question, but it worries me that we've got now people who are just terrified of doing any of that travel, having the experience that I had. And I have to be honest, I didn't really, even in the mid-90s, think too much about, should we be getting on this?
It wasn't in the narrative. It wasn't discussed or thought about. It was
Wasn't
just
there.
still the wonder of, well, of course, this is amazing. We've achieved this. Crack on.
Absolutely. So I think that awareness wasn't quite there. But I think it's a good question about should we be traveling in that way. But I look at some of the places that I visited and I'm still involved with, in places like South America, they would not survive if people weren't visiting them, if ecotourism wasn't a thing. And that has grown, and we have to balance things. But I know that many of these places just would not survive without people supporting them and people visiting them. So it's really difficult.
We could do 2 hours on that compromise and contradiction, and it's something I have to do with 10 of those on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
So, for example, 300 deer were killed across our estates last year because we need to try and give natural regeneration of woodlands a chance. Would I be willing to pull the trigger? No, I don't want to kill anything. But they were done in my name and at my direction. Does that make me a hypocrite? Absolutely. I don't know a better way at the moment, and it makes it really difficult. 3 weeks after you arrived back, we launched
a company, Origin Publishing, another specialist magazine company, and it became another adventure. We started from scratch. Had I known the real cash flow issues, I probably would have got out after 6 months, but we had such poor financial records, because it was really difficult. We were always working 6 months behind. So fortunately, we kept launching, and it was tough. We put everything into it, but
So go back to a moment where it felt tough. Describe what that felt like. What was that experience for you at the time, so people can try and get there with you?
I just think you're employing people's livelihoods, their mortgages, their families, all of that, and you just don't know whether it's going to work. So, and that sense of responsibility weighs heavily when you're going to have to make the decision: do you continue or do you stop? And so it's some of it's the money, but it's not really the money. The
And were there
money
nights
is
where you were trying to go to sleep thinking this is done, and then in the morning go, no, we can go again?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, absolutely. And it's that sense of responsibility for others. And I've never been, and I genuinely believe that, if I'd launched the company in order to make money out of it, I think we'd have failed. I always see, profit as a byproduct for doing something well. So you've got to make the best magazines that you can, whatever it is. It doesn't matter whether it's magazines, and imbuing a company with that culture where people really feel they can do their best work. That's what they're there for. And I passionately believe that you give people the opportunities, and that's great about magazines as well, because you can't stand over people telling them what to do. And some people get it and they throw themselves in, and some people don't. And it doesn't.
So I completely agree with every aspect of that culture. How do you make that a reality on a day-to-day basis? How do you make sure an environment is one that nurtures and allows people to do their best?
I think you give people that sense of responsibility, of that they have, what's the word? That nobody's telling them necessarily what to do.
The autonomy, isn't it?
It is autonomy. That's the word. Yeah, it's the autonomy that in the end you make the decisions. And actually, if you make a mistake, you learn from the mistake. And that's part of the culture as well, is you don't just, you're not there to bollock people about the mistakes. I mean, you do sometimes, but nevertheless, it's about how people learn from it and feel supported and feel that culture is not one that is always critical, but one that is fully supportive of them. And then people do feel that they want to contribute. And you also got to make it an adventure for them as well. So that's where people really feel they're on that trajectory, because they're working for a company, but they're also working for themselves, for their family, for their sense of pride, and giving people a sense of pride in what they're doing, being transparent as much as you can be, telling people what works, what doesn't, and it's a commercial business. So in the end, you've got to make a profit in order to be able to support people and keep paying people. But it's more than that. It is, I wanted people to come out whether they stayed, how long they stayed for, and there are people still there 25 years later who are still working for that company because they had that sense of pride. And it's gone through many iterations. So we built it very fast, and then I approached the BBC about publishing BBC Wildlife magazine because I'd been a reader of it, was passionate about the subject. And I thought,
so did that already exist, the BBC Wildlife?
Oh, yeah.
You were, right, but you wanted to move it to you in terms of the.
And what I thought, could we buy it? Could we publish it under license? We did a lot of contract magazines as well. So we built our own asset base through our own specialist magazines. And I was launching and buying magazines. And we started with craft magazines. We did history. We bought a magazine called Focus, which is now BBC Focus, a science magazine. I bought a triathlon magazine for £1. So what wasn't working, we turned it round. We turned it profitable magazine.
How did you turn that magazine around? What was the process?
Cut costs, improve quality. And of the two, improve quality is the more important one.
Yeah, it is.
So we sold more copies. We sold more advertising because we sold more copies, and we sold more copies because it was a better magazine. And that was it was fine, but it was being published by people who were enthusiasts, and it's always a balance in these things between having those people who are passionate enthusiasts about a subject and people who can publish and edit magazines.
You're so many things there. For those people listening to this, they're getting an MBA in business leadership from you right now. It's amazing. Well, what you described about the culture and the composition of building a team. I never think it's a fair question to ask people about culture, because it's not one answer, is it? It's everything, every day and every decision, and you defend it with everything you do. And especially from a leadership perspective, the decision you make, how you make it, how you communicate it, that's the culture. And it starts with the talent that you bring into a business and how you treat that talent and how you attract them and things like that. So asking anyone to answer it, it's years of answers, not one soundbite. But you could have been describing the green print to OC and everything you talked about there in terms of the adventure, wanting to align people with the purpose and the impact, and it being about more than just the work. No one comes to work with us because they want to get wealthy. They come to work with us because they want to make a massive impact. But we are absolutely a commercial organization. If you can't pay people, you're not in business. And you think about the Triathlon magazine, I think couldn't be any more true about the environment sector. So in that transition at the moment where there's a lot of people who are passionate about things, but there still needs people to hold us to standards of quality and performance. And the vast majority of the sector has a massive heart, but so much of it doesn't even know what good or hard work looks like, because it's still the purview of the hobbyist or, the weekend warrior, not the people who are trying to. And that's where we get a disconnect, where the environmentalists and the institutional investment that everyone's so desperate to welcome, they just talk a different language. They can't even communicate with one another at the moment. And that's a really fascinating sort of transition we're going through.
No, I think that's absolutely right. So I think that sense of purpose is really important, whether you're in magazines, and I genuinely felt, and I still do, I loved publishing, I loved magazines, I loved my time doing that. But and more than anything, I also genuinely felt that good magazines transform people's lives, and that can be, a cross-stitch magazine. We gave people things which made their lives better and improve the quality of their lives through a magazine, and a lot of that was pre a lot of the internet. So we were creating communities for people.
That's really hard for people now to think about, I think, but that was the way you accessed information. It wasn't available otherwise. Yeah. Like when I went to uni, dial-up internet had just arrived. If you wanted high quality imagery of how to do anything, it was through a specialist magazine.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
If we'd have looked at your array of publications, even though they're all different subject matters, was there a style, a positioning that marked out what you did? Would we have been able to tell a commonality across things?
Yeah, I think.
What were those?
It's hard to say, but I think in terms of design, you would have seen a commonality there.
In terms of a structure and a
absolutely structure. We were. A lot of magazines started to look very similar from the 90s and into 2000s, but it was. But it is the quality of the writing, quality of the design. It's about also making sure. I always think people buy a magazine and they're time poor, and the last thing they want to do, they want some bits from it. Something's grabbed their attention on the cover. They bought the magazine, they've got it home. They'll read that and they'll put it down. If that's the case, you failed. The purpose is to make people read things they didn't know they wanted to read when they bought that magazine. So you're constantly trying to increase the engagement with it so that next time they go in to buy it at the newsagent, they think, I really like that. I read far more of it than I thought. I'll just buy it anyway. There's bound to be something of interest. 3 months later, they go, I love this so much, I'm going to subscribe. 6 months later, they're telling their friends, going, this is a fantastic magazine. So that trajectory, that way, you're taking your reader on a journey as well, from being, disengaged to being an ambassador for your magazine, for your brand, for everything that you do. And that's all about making sure that everything in there keeps people reading. And that's about quality. It's about, it's some of it's technique. There are techniques to doing these things. And that's where people came into the company and they went on that journey, that learning journey as well. So you're right, there was a huge amount of talent in that company, and that's what made the difference. And we wanted to keep people, and we did. And that's all around purpose and fun. People had to enjoy what they were doing as well. So if it was nobody wants to work in a miserable environment where you're just being beaten up the whole time. This wasn't, by and large, not everybody had fun, and it wasn't always fun.
Not everywhere is right for everyone, I think.
It's not, and some people got their magazine out on time, and some people were always there till 10 o'clock at night doing it. So, and but they also saw that everybody worked hard and wanted to do well. So yeah, it was great. And so I approached the BBC about publishing BBC Wildlife, and they said no, because it's got the BBC brand on it. But they then came back and said, but we could buy your company and then you could publish it. And I said no.
Was that a face-to-face conversation? Was that a letter? What was that when they first said, well, we could buy you? What was that like? How did that happen?
I can't remember. I think it must have been a face-to-face conversation, I think.
Can you remember how you felt when they asked?
Well, I didn't want to. I'd only been going for we were going for about 7 years. We were still growing. We were building a lot of our own brands, but we were doing contract magazines as well. So I was publishing magazines for HMV, for Waterstones. We had a fantastic book for DHL to celebrate their 40th anniversary. I can't remember, but so that it was, and it still felt like an adventure. I was still enjoying it, so I certainly didn't want to sell at that stage. But there comes a point. There were indicators. One of them was the internet. We were seeing, that we were spending a lot more on having to produce websites. Then social media was starting. So we were at the time, you were seeing that profitability.
And was that a niggle, or was that a this is coming?
This is coming.
Yeah.
This is coming. We have to change, and we have to change rapidly, and we got to refocus the organisation from being just a magazine publisher into a media.
We look like
company.
a Blockbusters who just said no, it's fine.
You can't do that.
Gone. Yeah.
You can't do that. There's so many. Kodak, exactly the same.
Exactly.
So we knew that we had to, and that I was quite excited about that.
You were ready to go again with the next chapter,
and to move those brands.
I mean, of course you were, because the unique thing that made you able to do what you do was the passion for quality and that customer journey and that inspiring people, but also the range. You could see both the beauty and the elegance in providing the magazine, but also the beauty in each of the individual subject matters as well. Yeah. And I think in the absence of that, you couldn't possibly do what you were doing, because you were able to be passionate about every individual piece and the whole.
And there were lots of opportunities.
Yeah.
Because other people, like I said about Triathlon magazine, other people were finding it tougher out there. Well, if you really know what you're doing, and I think we did, you can take those opportunities and do something with them. But there comes a point where you think, actually, I can see some other opportunities as well. And eventually I said yes to the BBC.
What sort of time period from first conversation to we're going to do this?
It was quite quick. It was probably about 3 months.
Interesting. And how old were you at that point?
Mid to late 40s.
Okay, this is me just getting some life advice.
Yeah.
And what was so you're thinking about what else might I do instead, or in terms of
I was thinking, what's the next stage? What do I want to do now? And but equally, I wanted to publish some of those magazines. So I actually wanted to get my hands on BBC Wildlife, and I was contracted even after the sale to stay on, and wanted to. I mean, obviously there was an earn-out as part of that.
How long was the period?
2 years.
Okay, and was there opening offer 2 years, and you were comfortable with it? Or?
Well, it was a sort of 18-month period with a 6-month run-up to it. I was comfortable with that. I wouldn't.
Because you wanted to get in the magazines anyway, in terms of.
Yeah, exactly, and do something with it. I mean, sounds a bit worthy, but I genuinely could see that BBC Wildlife wouldn't, because of the commercial pressures on BBC Worldwide, you couldn't justify losing money on those magazines. So they got really big magazines, or had, like Radio Times, Top Gear, Gardener's World, and they were incredibly profitable. But specialist magazines like BBC Wildlife, BBC Music, classical music magazine, Homes and Antiques, BBC History. It's a different model to publish those.
How profitable would something like a Gardener's World magazine be for the BBC per year?
Oh, I don't know then. I couldn't say, but I mean, we're probably talking, million plus.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I've no idea. I didn't see the figures.
No,
Rose.
but that's all.
But that sort of, you could certainly look at that for a magazine like Gardener's World. We were selling, a couple of 100,000 copies, or were selling a couple of 100,000 copies, and Radio Times was selling over 1 million copies at its height. It's a very different beast now.
Do you have a feel for what that might be now?
I don't know. I'm sort of
Tens of thousands?
I'm so way out of publishing now. It's sort of, it's in the rearview mirror. And
I was thinking about that when you were telling a story before. So you would let that conversation with the BBC, and that you genuinely don't remember the detail of it. But at the time, that would have been one of the most significant things that had happened. So I think a really interesting learning point is, I always love the quote, "This too will pass." However good the day is, however bad the day is, it'll pass. And things that were massive chapters of your life are now just dots in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, absolutely right.
It's
I mean, I regret not writing this down. I've never kept a diary. I think, there's a phrase that, if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. And I just sort of worry that, but it just is received.
So with pretty much writing a piece a week at the minute, sort of 1,000 to 2,000 words, and we've been doing that for the last couple of years. And Abby, who's sat off camera, edits with me, and we're just writing the sort of topics and things for next year. And my first book gets published in Feb 25, working with Triodos, and it is the first chapter of OC. It's our experiences of, lots of people talk about wanting to do things in the natural capital space, but very few have an idea of the reality of what actually that looks like, and walking into a room of 50 neighbouring farmers and getting yelled at because you won't let them kill foxes. Isn't it illegal to hunt foxes? Yeah, but we want to do it anyway. Yeah, no, you can't. So the reality of those type of things is what we'll share there. But I like it because hopefully we're documenting some of these journeys and stories and things like that.
Brilliant.
What did, when you made the decision and the agreement to sell was there, and you had that 2-year period, was it still your business for that 2 years?
The BBC were great. I mean, I genuinely think these were really good, honourable people. Because there's sharks in publishing, like there are in a lot of businesses and a lot of areas. But actually, they were good to work with. They left us alone. We did that. We took magazines in. We transformed them. We had a lot of bad press at the time. Still remember Private Eye writing about me, what we were doing, how we were dumbing down these BBC magazines.
Did you ever meet Ian Hislop?
No. Actually, I did, because when I was in London, but only because he was a friend of somebody who worked.
I can't imagine he would have ever, if he spoke to you, accused you of dumbing down anything.
Well, yeah, but it was fine. And I had somebody who I had worked for, who was no longer working for me, wrote to Private Eye and said, that is not the case. So it was, and that's not how we publish things. So it was great to have somebody else defend it rather than doing it yourself. So I was, So, we got a lot of bad press because, a lot of it was snobbery. You look at a company that's publishing cycling magazines and cross-stitch magazines and knitting magazines, and you think, how on earth could they publish a classical music magazine? Well, I'd launched a classical music magazine previously, and but what we did was we saved those magazines. We turned them into, they were profitable by the time we'd finished over that 2-year period, and I don't think BBC Wildlife would have been here still had we not done the work, and I think it's a better magazine as well. So it was always good. I'd read it, and that's why I liked it. They were good magazines, but they needed to be done within a commercial framework, and that's what we gave them. And it's gone through a number of iterations. The BBC then had to sell them back. They sold them back to a management team. I came back as non-exec chair for a while until it came back again. So I was still involved with publishing even after I'd left.
Actually, the step away was quite a long form.
It was a gradual process.
So would you advise that to another departing founder? Do you think that sort of gradual away's healthier than the away on as soon as you earned out?
I don't know. It worked for me. It worked for me because I liked the people.
Yeah.
The MD, I was chief exec, and then I became non-exec chair, and my MD then stepped up and became chief exec.
And had that been someone you'd nurtured up through the business?
Yeah, and I'd worked with him. I've known him actually from a previous business, and he came first of all as publishing director and then managing director, one of the divisions within the company, and then overall managing director and then chief exec. And I saw him this week. I mean, we're still good friends. And,
Does the
and he's
business
brilliant.
still feel like yours?
No, absolutely not. I haven't even been to their new offices.
Two of my friends have exited companies in the last year or so, and they've lost their identity afterwards. It felt so tied to them. One of them had a really rapid earn out and was really happy about it, and then ended up in a 6-month period of, I don't know who I am anymore. The other was in a protracted earn out and was desperate to try and get out by the end of it because he didn't have the experience you did. And at that point, he was like, he then had this whole sense of loss that it wasn't there anymore. So it's really interesting how it sounds like your journey was very nicely done by you and the BBC, and actually in a really healthy way.
Oh, it was, and they were great. And then and then it got sold again. And I was a small shareholder as non-exec chair, and then I became a consultant. So I did quite highly paid consultant for a while. I think they all thought that what I was going to do, the big fear was I was going to start again. No, I was going to start again. I was going to go off and do something and compete. And I have to say, I had no intention of doing it. I wouldn't have told them at the time, of course, because they were paying me quite highly to come in for 1-2 days a week to do some consultancy work.
During that period, was Donna like, will you stop?
No, there was an element when I had stepped down, where I was sitting in front of the computer. This was in that hiatus period, immediately after I'd left, where I was just answering emails and I was talking to people and I was still on the phone the whole time. So you realise you're not getting paid for any of this. And
That's why you did it in the first place.
well, I know. But then we went away. She said, right, let's go away, shut the house up, get a house sitter. We were living in Bristol. And we went to Tasmania for 3 months, and it was fantastic because it was a good break. But that was the period when the management team was buying out, so they were phoning me first thing in the morning. I was just sitting down to eat something in Hobart, and on the phone for half an hour, and then coming back for cold food. It was quite an interesting period. But we went on we walked the south coast path of Tasmania, which is I think we took 12 days over it, and you get a small plane in, small Cessna, they drop you off, you take all your food for 2 weeks because you've got obviously contingency, and there's a path that's cut through the south coast, was cut for shipwrecked sailors and now is walked. And it is the most amazing experience. I mean, just a magical place. And yeah, you can. The forest is so impenetrable in places you just couldn't get off the path. So shipwrecked sailors, would say, "I'm alive," and then they die of starvation because they couldn't get out because the forest was so impenetrable, which is why it was cut. This path. That was fantastic. We had a wonderful time in Tasmania. Came back, realised we didn't need to live in Bristol anymore, found this house in Devon, and we moved to Devon on the edge of Dartmoor. And that was, again, so this is part of that adventure. And I'd also, by then, through BBC Wildlife, I'd been introduced to a guy called John Burton, who was the chief exec of World Land Trust, as what was at the time quite a small charity. It's been growing really rapidly over the last few years. And the premise of World Land Trust was we raise money here and we buy land overseas, but we don't own it. It's not a colonial model. We work with partners, in-country partners, to own the land, manage that land for conservation. And I love that model. They were working across South America, so they had a lot of projects in South America. Really interested in South American conservation, particularly forests, and particularly cloud forests, which I absolutely love. High altitude forest in South America, love the birds, love just being up there, and became involved with World Land Trust on their council, and then as a trustee, and then chaired their trading company, chaired their audit and finance committee for a while, and I remain involved for nearly 20 years. So I've stepped down from it now, but I think it's a great organisation and has grown So they're doing work all around the world, but all along that model, working with partners, in-country partners, and doing some fantastic conservation work. So, which is how I became involved in a lot of international conservation work, particularly in South America. And part of that was going back to when we were traveling. And I really wanted to go back to South America. I went back to with them to Paraguay and to Bolivia, looking at a project in Bolivia. And we set up a project working with BirdLife Bolivia for an endemic macaw, blue-throated macaw. And that, I haven't been there for about 8 years, and I'm still involved, still support the organisation, still support that project. And I get an email every 3 months going, when are you coming back to kind of have a look at what? Because they built cabins.
When are you going back, Kevin?
I'm going back next year.
Right. Let's keep the bird theme running, Kevin. Take us to the RSPB. How did you end up involved there?
I through World Land Trust, I knew, I met the treasurer of the RSPB at the time, and we became good friends. And he talked to me about, whether I would consider putting my name forward as a trustee for the RSPB. I've been a member of the RSPB for quite a long time. Thought it was a great organisation. Most of my focus up till then had been on international conservation work through World Land Trust. But RSPB as an organisation is working internationally, both as part of the BirdLife family, but also, a lot of its own work. We know birds don't respect our borders. So we've just talked about altitudinal migrants. A lot of the birds here are migrants either in the winter coming south from breeding in the north, or breeding here and then travelling south. So we're just part of that flyway, and the RSPB, is clearly looking at all of those flyways. So I said yes, went along, met some of the trustees, met the chief exec, and became a trustee in 2011. And then I stepped down in 2016, but was then asked to come back as chair of RSPB Council, which I started in 2017.
When you first started being involved in organisations from a conservation perspective in a non-exec capacity, how did you internalise and understand your role? What did you think you were there to do?
Oh, I think, there's quite a lot of learning, and I had some of that from World Land Trust, but it was a much smaller organisation. I think it's there's a whole range of things as a trustee that you're doing. There's a woman, Julia Unwin, who's written about the 5 S's of a trustee, and I'll see if I can remember them. But they are, scrutiny is part of that, because you're making sure that the organisation is well run, that it's financially secure. You're also responsible for the strategy of an organisation, and that's absolutely critical. It's the trustees who own that strategy. The executive is there to deliver on that strategy, and very often to produce it, but it's the trustees who sign it off. You're there to support the organisation. So I saw very much my role as both internal and external, as an ambassador for it. So always felt that, what I wanted to do was to make sure that I was supportive of the organisation. You're there to stretch the organisation as well. So that's part of that strategic approach to it, so that you can't just rest where you are. There's a lot to do. The need is great, as we've got huge challenges around climate and around biodiversity loss, and no one on their own can deliver all of that. So I think you've got all of that. I'm sure there's another S somewhere. Can't remember what it is now off the top of my head, but it'll come to me later. But I think that those are the key things that I saw, as a trustee, and going in, and also being part of a team. You're one of a number of trustees, and you bring a range of skills, you bring a range of knowledge to things. So I work quite closely with the magazine team at RSPB, for example. and the brand team and on the marketing side, because those were some of my skills from my publishing background. There's no point in me going in and telling the science team what to do. They just laughed. Rightly so.
When you think back of the other trustees you've worked with, what were the attributes or the behaviours where you thought they really contributed and did really well?
Yeah, I think commitment. You can't just coast it.
So many people try to, and that's
and that doesn't work. So you absolutely got to commit to it. Support for the organisation, recognizing that there is a line, but you're not there as an executive. So you've got to respect that line. And yes, at times you've got to hold people to account, and you've got to ask some tough questions, but you are there to support as well.
It's interesting if you don't exhibit the commitment and the respect and awareness of the role and responsibility, you can't really hold to account.
No.
Because you don't have the credibility to do it. That's where it becomes really difficult. I think the counterfactual for what you described as the high performing trustee, I've seen some of the not performing trustees and they all reverse tick those boxes.
Yeah.
When you think about the stretch S, are there any particular stretches that you remember offering up or suggesting that you were really proud that got traction and helped move the business forward?
I think a lot of that is around strategy. So the during my time as chair of RSPB, I would say some of the key things was recruiting a new chief exec during that time. Becky Spate, current chief exec of the RSPB, is absolutely brilliant. Huge fan. I think she's really transformed the organisation. She's transformed. I mean, it's been there for 139 years. The RSPB. It will go through lots of iterations. I've been talking about how I've worked in entrepreneurial businesses, and particularly ones we talked about. With magazines, separate units and small units. Well, the RSPB has got separate units, but it's a big organisation.
With a serious budget, significant organisation.
But I should say, we spend all of that, or they spend all of that. I can't use not we anymore. But they spend it because the need is great. I mean, so we also went through a governance review, and I absolutely now more than I think I understood when I first started as a trustee. The number of organisations I see that are not delivering because they have poor governance or government, and you can see that everywhere, not just with charities.
So illustrate that for people. What might that look like? What would you see that would help, would demonstrate that?
In terms of how governance works or doesn't work.
What would be an indicative situation where you saw a business or an organisation working in that way and that would make you go, they haven't got the governance right?
So I think with charities, you can see very often when they are not thriving because the governance is wrong, that they don't renew themselves for a start. So there are no term limits for trustees. So trustees hang on for a very long time. There's a charity that I know that I've never been a trustee of, that had a chair and a vice chair that together had been in post for 25 years. That's just you're not going to get a refresh of an organisation. No. You get stuck, you get stale.
The other one is the absence of a role and a responsibility. I'm just here. Yet to achieve what, to do what, to help in what capacity. I think when that isn't defined, it's just so ambiguous.
So I think having that structure in place, I mean, I live in a national park, Dartmoor National Park. The governance of our national parks is absolutely broken. They have purposes, particularly around delivering for nature, and those purposes are not being delivered, partly because their governance, they don't have the people with the background, with the experience, the skills to be able to support them to deliver that. So a lot then rests on the executive to be able to do it. The governance of our national parks. Now, that's not a failure of the national parks, because these are statutory organisations that then have that imposed on them. Governance is wrong. Get the governance wrong, organisations struggle to deliver on their purposes.
And the chief exec job of a national park is literally impossible.
Yeah.
Because it is grow economically the park and invite lots of people in and ensure nothing of any kind changes at all. Those two things are directly contradictory.
And you have statutory purposes around planning that you have to deliver, but you have less and less funding to be able to deliver the purposes of the national park.
In some ways, the national park moniker is the biggest greenwashing thing going, because the government just stick the label national park on something because people think that's a euphoric environmental haven where it couldn't be any further from the truth. It's actually a death sentence for nothing to improve for the better.
I hope that it will, but they are going to have to change the governance. They have to address the funding, and they're going to have to focus on those key things. So I think governance is really important. And we did a full governance review.
Done well. It's liberating and accelerating. It's not a break.
Absolutely right. That shouldn't be a break on things, and it shouldn't be, you're not having to work round poor governance, which some organisations do. It then means that your trustees and your executive board work together, supported, know their roles, those are defined, and then everything's focused on delivery of the strategy.
You'd have an amazing conversation with our new chairman, incredible gentleman called Benny Higgins, who you and him would have an amazing chat on this. Just before we leave national parks, I should say, I think the chief exec role is impossible, but there are some incredible people doing it who are trying to do the impossible and are somehow succeeding against all that. So shout out to some of those people who I
absolutely agree. And I know some of them. I know some of them very well, and and they got a tough job. I mean, Kevin Bishop, I feel for him. At Dartmoor National Park.
He was one of the people in my mind, yeah.
Yes, and he's great, but it's tough. It's really tough. So governance review, conducted that. New chief exec. If I had to say what are the key things that make RSPB such an amazing organisation, I think it's science. No other organisation has conservation science to the depth and the knowledge and the quality that the RSPB has. It's the foundation of everything the RSPB does. You can't do policy work, inside track policy work, unless you've got the evidence base to do it. And they are absolutely some of the most amazing scientists. I think the other thing is land. And talk about that with oxygen as well, because I think owning or managing land for conservation allows you to do a number of things. One, it gives you a stake. It means that you really do, particularly ownership of land in this country and managing land in this country. Yes, it allows you to demonstrate, to deliver what the science tells you for species recovery and nature recovery. It allows you to show that, to show others what good looks like. But it also means that when you talk to politicians and you talk to others, they know you've got a stake on the ground. That matters.
That range of interest is really interesting that you explore there. So we've now got land from Cornwall through Devon to the Welsh coast to Norfolk, the Yorkshire Dales, and up significantly into Scotland, all the way up into the Cairngorms now. And what we wanted to do with that portfolio was span every type of that scenario you describe. So you look at Leon on Dartmoor, elements of that, 120 acres of beautiful temperate rainforest that's about protecting that and stopping anything getting worse or damage, through to in the sort of gateway to the Highlands in Perthshire, we had a very degraded, damaged grouse moor that had been beaten within an inch of its life. Josh used sat behind the camera. When we first went to visit it, we stood on the hillside and looked at each other, and it was silent, deathly silent, because they'd killed everything that wasn't a grouse, so they could go back and then kill the grouse that weren't there anymore because even they had nothing to eat. And it's that whole array of things, so different topographies, geographies, hydrologies, embryology you can imagine, we have to demonstrate what you can do in each different place can help improve things for people and wildlife. So you're totally right, that ownership of the land was so important, especially for the speed of execution. And I don't mean reckless around there, because these projects still take years. So we try and take 12 months, changing the minimal amount of things possible, listening to local opinions and experts, and those things aren't necessarily the same. Local doesn't necessarily mean expert, and sometimes that's some fascinating contradictions where often people who see things locally, their view of good is please don't change anything. as opposed to the scientists who might be from the RSPB or a wildlife trust, or someone comes in and says, no, that wasn't how the land should be managed, and we need to give it more space and room and things. But we can enact, we can make a change, we can stop supposed predator control, we can take the land organic, we can take fences down, we can stop some of the bad that was happening much quicker than if you do have to work in partnership, which ideally you want to get to that point, but I don't think we have time for consensus on everything anymore, because the people who are destroying the planet are doing it at such a pace that we need to be taking action to preserve land.
Yeah. So I think that's absolutely right. And I think, that no regrets intervention at the beginning, I think, is really important. Do the things that you're not going to look back and wish you hadn't.
In Yorkshire, we bought a site that had been largely abandoned. It was still being grazed by a neighbouring landowner. All the property was totally dilapidated, had been absent for a while. And when you looked at the drone footage, it glowed neon green because the amount of chemicals put on the hillside. And it was like a soaking wet bowling green because it was grazing an inch of its life. And now this thing is 3 years later is magical. You go there and your eyes blur because the number of voles running in front of you. And somebody local sent us a picture saying how much of an abomination it was because it looked beautiful before when it was green and nice and tidy, and now it looks terrible now. And it's like, we know you feel that way. We respect your ability to have that opinion. It's not right.
Well, I think, and that is part of the problem. We have to change the way people view this, the aesthetic of landscape.
Yeah.
And at the moment, people are used to exactly that bright green field. I mean, I get people who come and stay with me in Devon and go, Devon's so beautiful, it's so green. And I think, how much of that is oil-based fertilizer that's been poured on there?
How do we do it, Kevin? The whole thing about anything, when you talk about education, is such a big issue. How do we even begin that process?
You show people. So it isn't just about telling people. You've got to take people and you show them and you uncover that and you show them there is a different model. I mean, that's what, I think RSPB does. And I think the third thing I'd say about the RSPB that I really respect is what I would call its generosity. It recognises as an organisation that it can't deliver the change that we need on its own, however much land you own, and you know this, however much you do, you've got to work in partnership. We will not shift the dial on nature recovery unless we work together. And the RSPB has got some really big sites and works within those Lawton principles of, bigger, better. So we're all the time looking to make those reserves bigger, make them better based on the evidence, what better is, and sharing that with people, but it's the joined up bit. How do we join it up? And that's about partnership. It's working with others, but it's also generosity in taking people, showing people, sharing the evidence base as well. And that's one of the things, Donna, my wife, and I are really committed to at home as well. We've brought people to us the whole time to show them on a much smaller scale why we're doing things in the way that we do, so all the time bringing people and then giving them that experience of a different model, and one where you can say the kestrel's here because we've let the grass grow, because there are voles to feed the kestrels. So the barn owls are here for the same reason. Why when we bought our house, 18 years ago now. It's got 90 acres of woodland next to it. I went through some really interesting woodland birds and looking particularly for pied flycatchers. So, and most people, wouldn't necessarily know what they are. It's a rare bird, it's red listed. There weren't any there, because of working with others, and particularly with the RSPB, that generosity in sharing evidence. I knew that the way to attract them was putting up nest boxes. We did. This year we had 41 pairs. So but you could put as many nest boxes as you like up in a Norfolk woodland, and you're not going to get pied flycatchers nesting there. So what's right in a particular place? That's why land in different places, sharing the knowledge, bringing people, shifting the way people see things. And I think that's happening with farming at the moment as well. We're genuinely going through that transition. It's slow. It's not taking everybody on the same journey at the same pace, but there are more and more people out there who are saying, we're free now of common agricultural policy. Good agricultural condition, which you used to have to keep land in, meant this was a field, that was a hedgerow, that was a tree, and none of them mix. And now we're starting to mix things up. And it's not happening at the speed or the pace that it should, but that transition is starting to happen. And the great thing is that there are people like you, people like the Wildlife Trust, people like RSPB that can actually demonstrate that you can farm and you can have nature, and we can start to bend the curve on nature recovery here. And it isn't, I absolutely feel passionate about the work that the RSPB does. I love the organisation, love the time that I spent there. Because of governance, I know that it's time to move on and hand over to others. But I think a lot of that, I could easily have done that with Wildlife Trusts. I think all of those organisations working together and working with others, with landowners, with farmers, bringing everything. We're not going to do it alone.
Totally agree. Kevin, there's so much in that. So first things first, the connectivity bit. So we bought, by the time this is released, we'll have bought 45,000 acres in the last 3 years. I got this fact checked 3 times because I didn't believe it. We have connected to more than 500,000 acres of land that has an expressed conservation first purpose, which is staggering and is so amazing. And I think when I thought about the portfolio we could put together, I didn't imagine we'd be able to 10 times it in terms of connectivity. So important. It's why we think visitors and the ecotourism side of things, for us, is so important. So we really stepped into ecotourism this last year. So probably about a 6-month season across our 2 principal estates where ecotourism is. So Mornicott, where we are now, and Manor Farm in Norfolk. We had 1,000 visitors this year. Our whole thing is about sharing as much as we can on this. So we talked about the book earlier. We've published an article a week for the last 2 years. We've done almost 100 podcasts now. The intent of that, whenever anyone asks us, we're trying to share every mistake we've made, everything we've learned, because we want everyone to work together in this. When we're recording this, I'm just about to release a piece called Collaboration, Not Competition. Now, that's a bit of a misnomer because I think we all need to collaborate as an industry and together and grow the whole natural capital sector. And in there, I include the charities and the trusts who are doing the thing they're doing in amazing ways. But what we can't do is expect them to be financial organizations as well. They can be brilliant charities and brilliant trusts and do the things they do well. We need the businesses to then be great at business as well and work together. The other side of that is a longer discussion. It's why a forum like this is great, is that doesn't mean I'm going to stop competing against climate change and against biodiversity loss and against ourselves and get better and better every day. But as far as a market goes, we need to share everything and grow it. Battle against solving climate change isn't about whether it's us or Nattergal or whoever is the company who grows biggest. It's about the fact people need to genuinely value nature, and we need to put a price tag on doing the wrong thing for the environment, so it isn't more financially beneficial to destroy the environment than it is to protect it.
Completely agree. Of course, that's the big shift. I think the other shift is that you've got to give people a vision about what we're going to, because as you said, a lot of people, all of us actually, we like the status quo. I like going home and knowing that my house is still there. And there are certain things I don't want to change.
I know.
I'd love to. I've got an old dog. I don't want him to go because I love him. So, but things will change. And you either fight it, or you have a vision of something that's better. And that, again, is around hope. It's around giving people a sense of hope that actually we are transitioning to something that is going to be better for everybody, because the alternative is much worse. And that's partly because for the very first time, I think the world is facing genuine existential challenges around climate and biodiversity loss. And because they're incremental, people aren't necessarily taking what we've seen this with the 2 COPs this year. It's a disaster, and people will look back and think, how could you let this happen? So I think there is a huge onus on all of us working in conservation to give people a sense of hope, but also to share some of the joy of what we've still got, not to look at what we've lost, but actually look at what there is still there. This is
why we need
amazing
great.
environment.
Completely agree in every which way. So I think, and Laura, our data lead's going to kick me for this, but I think we have something like 70 plus different habitat types across the portfolio that we can recognize. And it's the ability to demonstrate each of those and show people about them in different chapters. And actually, we're going to publish Josh's first photo book in the new year, which is the 3 years of OC through the seasons. And you can see how landscapes have changed just in that really short time period. If we fast forward 30 years of OC, then we'll really start seeing some traction, some ability to change things.
Yes, and I can see that with the RSPB. I've seen reserves that have gone from a standing start. You look at, and scale is the other thing.
Yeah.
So somewhere like Wallasea Island in River Crouch in Essex, which was arable farmland, was under threat from sea level rise. Over a period of time, all of the spoil from Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, was now taken round, put on there, and it is the most amazing wetland site. Flood mitigation, this has happened within 10, 15 years. The place is absolutely transformed. Last year, there were 38,000 birds using it as a winter stopover. We can do this.
We've got to choose to do it.
We've got to choose to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're right. We do need money to do that. That solved a problem for Crossrail, because otherwise, where were they going to put the spoil?
Yeah.
That spoil's created one of the most amazing nature reserves in this country, but it's also got other societal benefits around flood mitigation as well, and of course, everything that it's doing for some of our most threatened birds.
One of the things I adore about listening to you, Kevin, is even in the face of abject climate crisis and biodiversity collapse, your optimism and enthusiasm, and you bringing each of the lessons through the different type and chapters of your career is so inspiring, gives me so much hope as well. So one final question, because I'm conscious of time. What is the one question I haven't asked you that you wish I had?
I suppose it's what's next. What am I going to do next? Because I'm involved in a number of things. Some of that is, managing our own land at home, which I love. I absolutely love it.
So I'm not suggesting for a second that all the listeners are getting an invite, but Kevin's place is stunning. It's a really incredible part of the world.
Well, I like bringing people there, as you know, and we like doing. And
11,000 downloads.
No, we don't. No, we don't need 11,000 people turning up. And we have, because Donna, my wife, runs this organisation called More Meadows. She's got over, I think, nearly 3,000 members of it, and on Dartmoor alone, I think there's about 1,200 acres of meadows that people have put voluntarily onto a map. So we invite people. She runs the More Meadows Open Days. And we invite people. We love having people round, and we have volunteers and we have groups. So I work with Ambios, the rewilding centre at Sharpham in South Devon, and they bring their trainees to us. I think all that's great, sharing that. I'm working on a project called the Devon Swift Project, where we're putting nest boxes for swifts into churches. There's a great guy we've got. It's a carpenter, a guy called Jerry, who just he's put over 1,000 individual nest boxes for swifts this year in 34 churches and in the South Tower of Exeter Cathedral. It's a brilliant project. And all my job is to try to see whether we can get funding. It's not huge. We can transform. Swifts are 60% decline over the last 25 years, and it's mostly because of lack of nest sites. We can transform them. Here, there are 600 churches, 605 churches in Devon. We can transform them if we put boxes into every church. That's our goal. Might take a few years. Dartmoor Nature Alliance, a lot of my focus is now on Dartmoor. Dartmoor is a really contested area at the moment.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated. So working with a really good group of people, including the chair, Harry Barton, from Devon Wildlife Trust, or ex-Chief Executive Devon Wildlife Trust, Guy Shrubsole, Tony Whitehead, Rebecca Wrigley from Rewilding Britain, Jenny Isaac from More Trees, a group of us got together and said, we need to focus in our national parks, but particularly where we are, on Dartmoor, on nature recovery. It is one of the purposes of the national park. And I understand why they haven't been able to focus on that. Funding, it is a contested area, but a lot of focus is on it. This is the time we need to bring that higher up the agenda. So it's a campaigning organisation, but it's going to do more than that. It is going to, I hope, inspire people of what Dartmoor could be like if it was a nature-first area. And all our national parks, if we want to deliver 30 by 30, 30% of land and sea well managed for nature by 2030, our national parks need to be those core sites in that network across the country. And we'll start on Dartmoor, because I think it's really important to do that. So a lot of things happening. I'm not sure what else. It's. I think it's an exciting time. I'm quite excited about the things going.
I think
forward.
you've got one more coming as well. I think there's a space in your mind for one more big chapter adventure thing. I don't know what it is yet, but I think when we speak in the next few months, you're going to be like, there was one more.
There is something else.
Of course.
But it's not. I'm not sure I'm ready to go back into another organisation. I've sort of done that, and I quite like those. Having a sort of portfolio of things that I'm involved with, I think that's quite nice.
Full circle. You had a portfolio of different subjects and topics and range of things, so of course it was meant to be.
Yeah.
Kevin, I could talk to you and listen to you for hours. Thank you so much for coming in.
It's been great. Thank you very much. It's been brilliant to talk to you, Rich, and thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Our pleasure.